So, hello and welcome to Scandinavia House and tonight's talk on the literature of Harald Voetmann. All three novels are out now, published by New Directions, and they will be on sale over here after the event. And I would like to give a big thank you to New Directions for helping making this event possible. Upcoming programs at Scandinavia House, so we also have a Faroese book talk next Monday as well, by Kim Simonsen, and I'm going to blank on the title right now. What will you do on this side of the millennium? It is a book of poetry, and the translator, Andy Ward, will be with us as well on next Monday. So do visit the website, scandinavias.org, for everything that we have on to offer. We also have a lot of films, concerts. The exhibition is up, so please do come back and visit us. But Harald Voetmann is nominated for the Nordic Council Prize. He has written novels, short stories, poetry, monographs on the Roman poet Scalupia. He has translated classical Latin literature, notably Petronius and Juvenal. Awake is the first in the series of three historical novels. The second centers around the 16th century Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, and the final introduces the 11th century German mystic Othello of Saint Emmeram. Moderating tonight is Morten Høi Jensen. He is a Danish-American writer and author of The Masters of Contradictions, Thomas Mann and the Making of the Magical Mountain, and A Difficult Death, the life of the works of Jens Peter Jacobsen. His essays, reviews have appeared in the New York Review of Books, Commonwealth, Liberties, and the Washington Post, and elsewhere. The author of The Masters of Contradictions, Thomas Mann, and the Making of the Magical Mountain is out now from Yale University Press. So please welcome Harald and Morten.
Thank you so much. It's a huge honor to be here with Harald Voetmann, who is, I think, not just one of the most original contemporary Danish writers, but just one of the most wildly original writers that I have ever read. And I think, Harald, you're going to start off by reading some excerpts, both in Danish, so you can hear what the Danish original sounds like, and then also from the translation.
Yes, thank you. And forgive me, I have to read the Danish from my phone, because I simply forgot to bring along the Danish books. So I'll begin by just a minute or two in Danish, and then I'll switch over to the book, which is, looks better to read from, I guess. And this is from the beginning of the last book in the series, Visions and Temptations. Hans negle og tænder var vokset gennem jernhandske, hjelmvisir og støvlesnude, og i løbet af de næsten 2 århundreder havde de dannet et krat fra gulv til loft i gravkammeret, en flosset puppe omkring Carolus Magnus. Mændene, og deriblandt min far, måtte hakke sig igennem det med svær. Tandfli og neglesplint fløj dem om ørerne, mens de stormede. De viklede harnisk og grøde tøjmasse af livet, fra hvis fingre, tær og gummer dette vildnis var vokset, og som engang, da han var et levende menneske, havde genrejst det jordiske kejserrige. De viklede en dåbskjole om Carolus Magnus, for at han kunne være beredt til sin ankomst i det himmelske, hvor han med rette vil være blandt de første til at få vasket sjælefødder af Herrens ministranter, så han kan stå ren for Jesu Kristi øjne. And then I'll read the same in English, but a bit longer. So I'll read the beginning of this first chapter, which is called "Through the Gruel I Still Saw a Light." And it opens with a sort of a vision of Carolus Magnus, as he's called here, but that is Charlemagne, as he's known. And it's the protagonist, Otho of St. Emmeram, who's speaking. Over the course of nearly 2 centuries, his nails and teeth had grown through his iron gloves, his helmet visor, and the toes of his boots to form a thicket that filled the tomb from floor to ceiling, a ragged cocoon shrouding Carolus Magnus. The men who stormed the tomb, my father among them, used their swords to cut their way through, sending shards of teeth and nails slicing through the air around their heads. From the armor and pulpy cloth, they extricated the body of the man who in life had restored the earthly empire, and from whose fingers, toes, and gums this wilderness had grown. They wrapped Carolus Magnus in a baptismal gown to prepare him for his arrival in heaven, where he will rightfully be among the first to have their sole feet washed by the Lord's servants, and thereafter stand pure before the eyes of Jesus Christ, son of one of the men who dressed the emperor in heavenly white, and firm in my faith in salvation, though I have merely sought to serve the Lord through singing and writing, undeserving of my salvation. I lie in the near silence I have fought so long for. I doubt my Father will see the glory of the Emperor in the heavenly city. The silence here is not yet complete. There are stains of sound, an echo of alien sounds in the silence, from outside and from below, even from above, merely sounds of the half-perished world where we are dying, already less real, less tangible than the clouds in heaven. In the dark sky, a light emanates from the clouds. It is not the moon nor the stars, but the clouds' own light, shining through their bellies from the spires of heaven. This light from the clouds and Rekannesburg maybe shines below me. As I fell from the bench, I pulled the tablecloth with me, bowls, spoons, knives, chunks of bread, and all that gruel. Finally, the basin toppled. Sticky gruel was slopped on me, covering my face. It filled my nostrils, flooded my throat, sealed my eyes and ears. 3 brothers rose, untangled me from the tablecloth, and pulled me up to sit on the bench. They had to support me as they wiped the gruel off my face, as my body could muster no strength besides coughing the stickum of my uvula. Brother Otho, someone said from the other end of the dining hall, as I sat gazing through the veil of cooked grain still dangling from my brows. No one had spoken before, and no one has spoken since. Rustling can be heard from above, the sound of duties carried out by those still able. Duties will always abound. Soon the congregation will shuffle toward the night stairs to Mass. Perhaps I will hear the choir below me. I must find the strength to sing along from my straw bed. Anyone wishing to serve the Lord must sing to the best of his ability. Merely moving one's lips is not enough. This room has been empty for years. Here are only the stones in the wall, the straw bed on which I'm lying, the rotting pieces of straw on the floor, the embers in the brazier, no apparitions to interpret. There used to be hams hanging from the beam and sacks full of dried pork here, but the brothers have moved them to the infirmary where they believe they are permitted to eat bloody food without the Lord's disapproval. It has been empty for so many years. I have passed this room every day on my way to supper without knowing it was waiting, standing empty for me. Through the gruel, I still saw a light. Carolus Magnus sits in his tomb in Oche, now wearing baptismal dress. His armor lies at his feet. His teeth and nails have started growing again. A moment after stepping into the tomb's darkness, one senses him as the source of the wilderness he has produced, a little lighter than the rest. Thus he will appear, shapeless and intangible, only slightly lighter than the dark, like a cloud in the tomb. Thank you.
So you're a Danish writer visiting America, which means that somebody has said to you on this trip, "Oh, I've heard that Denmark is the happiest country on the planet," and you should respond to them by reading that excerpt. You know, your novels are so wildly original, and I hope, as you could all hear, there's a real physicality in the writing that we'll get to, because I have questions about your interest in the human body. But maybe to begin with, these are 3 novels set in 3 very different historical periods. And I wanted to ask you just generally about your background and your interest in and training in history. And I understand you studied Latin at university. So if you could say something about where this interest comes from.
Well, I think I've always sort of had an interest in this, but well, I had written a few books. I think my first book came out when I was 21 or something, and I had been reading contemporary literature and attended a writing school in Copenhagen, almost exclusively reading contemporary literature. And then I sort of stumbled onto some Roman poets and found out that the sort of that I couldn't read it in the same way, even though I read it in translation. I didn't have the necessary tools for understanding this in that way. And something drew me in. Then I also think I saw the idea of learning Latin as a key that could open all kinds of things, because it was used for so many centuries as the sort of universal language of literature and science and philosophy. So yeah, it wasn't only one kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
And ever since you first began writing fiction, was it always, even before you were published, was it always with a kind of historical focus?
No, that came later. I would say the first time I got near to that was maybe around 2008. There was sort of a surge in autobiographical literature in Denmark at that time. There was not very much like the kind that is written now, because it was
not like autofiction, or was it a little bit similar?
Well, it was a bit more like glorifying memoirs, where the author looks back on all their past hardships, and you're supposed to feel sad for them, but also glad with them. Now they've overcome all this, and they've even written this book about it. And I wanted to write a text that was in a way autobiographical, but I wanted to see if it could be done without portraying oneself as either a victim or anything. I mean, I think August Strindberg, the Swedish author and playwright, he has this idea of the author as, on the same time, the bug and the entomologist. So, like, putting a pin in yourself and holding it out. And I was interested if that could be done. Could I take my own miserable childhood and try to stick a pin in that and hold it out? And I found out that the only way I could do that was actually by writing about something else, because it was so boring when I tried to just write about it. So I began writing about the guy who my childhood home, the guy whom the street was named after, who was a priest in the 17th century. Not a particularly interesting figure, apart from the fact that he choked on some sort of meat, and then I found out that he didn't actually choke on it, but it just sort of got stuck, and then he died from starvation with this meat in his throat, and he built his own coffin that he laid on the family table, and he crawled into that and died. So I sort of told that story alongside the story of my childhood and my mother's death and all these, and by just focusing on the other thing, I could have this as a sort of background, and it actually did the trick. And then I found out, okay, I have if I want to invest myself in my writing, then I have to look away at other things, at other voices, and that is the thing that interests me most, is getting close to other voices and seeing how they can affect my voice, and especially these figures from the ancient past, or the pre-modern figures writing in Latin, that is so different from what I am just naturally. So it's very, very interesting to try and examine.
I like this. It seemed like you were saying, just by redirecting your gaze a little bit away from your own background, you can kind of get at the truth in a different way. So Awake is the first of these three novels. Did you conceive of them as a trilogy, or did that sort of come more organically as you were writing them?
I began writing Awake while I was making a translation of just a tiny excerpt of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, which is a Roman encyclopedia of the natural world.
It's like 37 volumes.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Well, 37 books. But his and books at that time, that's a papyrus scroll. But according to his nephew, his papyrus scrolls were twice as long because he wrote on both sides, and they didn't usually do that. So it is quite a long work, but it's not 37 volumes.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. Yes, I was translating him, and I started writing these texts alongside, and I had no intention of writing a novel. I didn't know what it was. Someone had to tell me, you are writing a novel. So and that came, and then later, while I was working on the second, I found out there had to be a third, because the two first, in a way, are sort of parallel. They both talk about these proto-scientists who want to understand and conquer nature in a way. And I wanted to it to end in another place.
Okay. So you were working on a translation of Pliny the Elder, and you said someone had to tell you that you were working on a novel.
Yeah.
Who told you that, or was it a voice sort of in your head, or when did you realize that this was a novel?
Well, actually, this person I'm sure you know. There are these so-called writers' meetings every year at the thing called the Danish Academy, which is held where Karen Blixen lived, and it's a thing that really scares Danish authors. And the first time I was there, I was terrified. Because you go there and the Danish Academy are sitting and you have to read something in front of them, and then they judge you. And they tell you what is wrong with it. But I was there while I was writing Awake, and I read from it. And then this other guest who was there, not a member of the Academy, Hanne Vibeke Holst, who is a novelist and has written many large and popular novels. And I think she just had the ear for it. She could tell that even though I said this is just independent prose pieces, she could hear.
Very interesting. And then, so, I mean, the way, I'm so interested in the writing process of these books, because there must have been a lot of research involved, and they're sort of built up as collage-like in their style, and you have different types of text throughout the novel. So you have sometimes direct quotation from Pliny the Elder's, in the case of Awake at least, of Pliny the Elder's writings. You have third-person narration. You have just different types of text. So how does one do that? If that's not too fun, broad of a question.
No, I think well, they're set in different time periods, of course. So Awake is set in the Roman Empire, and Sublunar is in Renaissance Denmark, and this is in 11th century Bavaria, Visions and Temptations. And I found out that I wanted to actually give each book a form that corresponded with the era it was set in. And for Awake, that is the antique tragedy, because Pliny was also a tragic figure in that the point of his work was he wanted to sort of conquer nature and be the first person to write about everything that exists. And there's a sort of aggression in this also. And then he famously died when the volcano Vesuvius erupted, after writing this book where he brags about his mastery over nature. So I thought that sounded a bit like a Greek tragedy to me, with the hubris and the nemesis. And then Sublunar, I gave that the form of a Renaissance almanac, which were popular books at the time, where you could read about all the different months of the year and what to do, when to do, sow and harvest, and and Visions and Temptation is also based on a popular form of literature at that time, which is the journey through heaven and hell, which there are many of those before Dante's time. So the different kinds of texts also come from that, I think.
But do you? I mean, how much? How do you balance? Because one of the things that I find really remarkable about these books is there's a Henry James quote about historical fiction where he says it's almost impossible to do because you cannot capture the old consciousness, that you cannot convey what it felt like to be alive back then and to inhabit the minds of people from long ago. And I somehow feel that you do that when I'm reading these books. I think it's partly because there are so many very tangible and even grotesque details. What I said before was the real physicality in your fiction. How much of a burden is it when you're writing to? I mean, how do you live or imagine your way into ancient Rome or the 11th century and so on? How does one do that?
I think a lot of it has to do with the thing I talked about with the voice. I mean, just reading literature of the time period and reading it in the original language, because there's so much in any language that also contains forms of thought that you don't get to see in the translation. So I think that thing of sort of parroting the voices is one part of it, but then of course the other is the physicality, insisting on that these were humans that sort of squelched around in the same kind of weird containers that we do now, in different areas and different places, but we have this physicality in common, and a lot of the both the desires and the misery that comes along with that is still the same.
So I sort of think of your portrayal of Pliny the Elder and of Tycho Brahe, or Tycho Brahe, I think Americans say, as they are both Don Quixote and Sancho Panza in one. Because on the one hand, you have these delusions of grandeur about wanting to conquer nature or observe the night sky, but they're both kind of also just, as you just said, squelching human beings. What did you? So with Sublunar, when did you realize that was going to be the second book? Did you conceive of it as? Did you start on it before you realized that you were writing a second book, or?
No, I was asked if I wanted to write a play about Tycho Brahe, and I had just written Awake, and I thought, I actually said no right away, because I thought that's sort of the same story. He wants to, as he writes in one of his poems, he has written this poem about dragging the muse of astronomy, Urania, down from the sky and locking her in his castle. So there's this idea of this male conqueror scientist again, and I thought that was sort of parallel, and I didn't want to write the same book. But then at the same time, it occurred to me that the first book I had written probably was about my father, who was a scientist and who was always distant and away, and trying to unlock the mysteries of nature. So then I thought, let me try again, but this time with the awareness of this, and see if
how do you? I'm so curious about the kind of shaping or even the research process of some of these books, because there are just some wonderful, bizarre details in these books. And one that comes to mind is in Sublunar. So Tycho Brahe, his nose was cut off in a duel, right?
Yes, well, not entirely cut off, but he was chopped into it, and then he had this sort of metallic nose bridge made.
So as you see in the cover, it probably might have looked something like that.
Yes.
But there's a really bizarre part in that book where he receives a letter, or he is responding to a letter from someone who has kindly offered to sew his forearm onto his...
Yes.
As a way of growing a new nose or something?
Yes. And that was a thing. That was an actual Italian doctor at the time who had, and I now forget his name, but I have seen the illustrations he made of the process. Apparently it worked, but the patient had to lie still for weeks or maybe months with their arm sewn to their noses. And of course, Tycho didn't want that, and probably he would also think that a golden nose, which was a big improvement over one made of the cheap flesh. One of his big heroes, the Greek mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras, it was said of him that he had a golden thigh. I don't know how that came about, but I'm sure that Tycho could see some similarity in that.
But so when you are writing these books, is it? And I mean, you come across these stories and these details. How do you balance the fact and the fiction, or is it something that you sort of don't really try to think too much about, and it kind of happens organically?
I love taking as much as I can from the real world, from history and from literature of the time. That makes it so much easier and also so much more fun, because these things, I can't think them up. But in some cases, the sources are a bit more scarce. Of course, when it comes to the Middle Ages in Bavaria, there's a lot of religious literature. There's not very much that tells us about their lives. So then I just, it leaves more room for me to think of something, but the process I really enjoy is picking out stuff from the sources.
And then to try to balance those, and you mentioned that each book kind of is sort of modeled on the forms of the time, so what does that look like in terms of, when do you think you've got the shape of the novel the way you want it? Is it simply sort of a balance of detail and when, because it's so it seems so intricately and carefully built up, and it reads very deceptively easily, but it must be difficult to pick and choose among some of these stories and details.
Yes, of course. I collect a lot, and not everything makes it in. When it comes to composition, I always have systems of some sort, and a Greek drama. Then you have like very easily identifiable system, and I knew I had to sort of change between the scenes where there's action and then these more reflective, meditative parts. When it came to Sublunar, there's the idea of the year, so I had to fill out all the months, and then it was there. And Visions and Temptations, well, that was sort of blasted out. That book. I think I wrote it in about 3 weeks, but I had been researching it for a few years. But I don't remember if I actually had rules for the composition, but I ended up having rules for the act of writing in itself. So it was written mostly in a program, a text editor program that was called Write or Die 2. And the thing with this text editor is that you tell it how long you want to write for and how many signs it should be. And then if you're not fast enough, it begins deleting the text, but not in the beginning or the end, just randomly. Just take out random words, and so you have to keep it up. So I had the novel planned, but the reason I did this was I had been walking around with the idea of the story, or Othello's story, for at least a year, and I couldn't write. And then I was in some situation at home where loud music was blasting, and I was stressed, and suddenly the beginning I just read, just the opening thing with Charlemagne in his tomb, sort of just came out in the middle of me being stressed out. So I thought, okay, this voice only opens when I'm stressed out. So I found this program. I've tried to find sources of, well, everyone can find sources of stress everywhere, but I actually deliberately looked for it there. And I asked people for suggestions for sort of heavy metal music, which I'm not into at all. But I got some very loud suggestions there, and I was listening to this and writing on the Write or Die thing, and then, you know, when I made my quota each day, I could sort of salvage the scraps out from that and piece it together. So
that is impressive and horrifying. I don't think I can write a birthday card in 3 weeks.
But I wouldn't want to do it again, and there's a reason it only I had it done in these weeks. Yeah.
So now that well, as a translator yourself, how involved are you in the translation process, if at all? And if it's different depending on the language that it gets translated into?
It is different depending on the language, but yes, and English is the only one where I've been able to read it. And I'm very lucky, I think, with my translator Johannes Sornfri, who's also publishing a book the coming spring, her first novel. And I think she's done a really wonderful job with it. And she's also been very good at asking me about, well, I let her take the decisions, but she asked me about a lot of things, and I guess the answers that come from me are mostly vague. I talk about, I wanted this kind of atmosphere, or I wanted it to be like that kind of music, or something like that. But she's very good at just understanding and using that. So I'm very lucky, I think, with that.
Great. I can ask more questions, but I wanted to check to see if there are any questions from the audience. If anyone has anything they want to ask. Christina?
Well, you talked a bit about the research process, and it sounds like there was a lot of text that you were consulting. But I'm curious, especially being in Denmark, where a lot of, excuse the pronunciation, Tycho Brahe's things were. Did you also visit and look at objects? Were you going to locations and buildings to also immerse yourself in these different time periods?
Yes, and especially with that one, I went to. He had a castle on an island in Denmark that was given to him as his private property, and well, the island is actually part of Sweden now. But I was there many times, and mostly to get a feel of the landscape, because the castle itself is torn down. His underground observatory is still there, and the landscape is the same. So I tried to be there in all different times of the year and times of the day. It's a wonderful place. They make pasta and goat's cheese and whiskey, and I think there's no reason actually to ever leave that island.
Yeah, and in Sublunar, the different chapters, many of them begin with extraordinarily memorable and beautiful descriptions just of the weather, and it begins with their observations of the weather and the direction of the wind and so on. And so it's very evocatively described. Anyone else have questions? Yeah.
You said that learning Latin was like a key to some other kind of, not reality, but like some other, like you needed further training in order to understand that world. And you said that kind of you draw on certain structures for these novels and so on, but I was wondering, was there something that is not apparent in contemporary fiction that kind of moved you, that you sought to emulate in some kind of way, which might perhaps have been untranslatable, like something like that, like something that is kind of radically new to a contemporary reader?
That is a good question. I think maybe I was perhaps also drawn to some of these fixed forms, the metrical poetry, and the idea of these stricter forms that were very different from at least what was being written in Denmark at that time. And perhaps that is also the part of me that always looks for these rules to write by. That was looking for that as well. I don't think I had the thought at the time, but it does appeal to me. If that answers your question. Yes.
Yeah, I really, what you said before about forms of thought being, that you can find the different ways of thinking in the language used is extraordinarily interesting. And when you were saying that, I was thinking that that after the pandemic, there were many people who sort of felt like, oh no, what's going to be the first pandemic book and blah, blah, blah. And you've already written it because you wrote a pandemic diary from the perspective and in the language of Hans Christian Andersen. That is among, I think, just my favorite of your books. I just wanted people to know that Harald has written this book because it's extraordinary. And it reads like actually Hans Christian Andersen's diary, but in the year 2020. Any other questions? Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Well, I can say one thing that I've just finished, which is a translation of a book called The Hortulus, the Little Garden. It's called, made by a monk in the 9th century, and he's just writing about the garden in the cloister. And it's completely static and full of light. It's sort of a glowing poem. And I wanted to translate it for years, and it was so joyful to finally be able to do it. And I think perhaps it's also, writing about plants is allowed in his time. He also wrote actually a few love poems for other men, but they were sort of masked. And he wrote some boring stuff about religion. But when he writes about the plants in the garden, the light is just emanating out of it. So that has been a great joy to work on.
Yeah, I wrote down a quote from, this is from Awake, that I just love, and that speaks to what you're describing right now. This is in the voice of Pliny the Elder. I believe that the gardens at Tusculum, this is Pliny the Younger. I believe that the gardens at Tusculum were my uncle's attempt to contain the unknown, create a perimeter around it, and become its master. That's just a passage I particularly liked. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there anyone that you've tried to translate or write in the voice of where it wasn't possible?
Well, there are some book ideas that I have thrown away. One after working on it for a few years, actually, which was horrible. But that was perhaps because I needed another voice to work up against, because there was lacking there. The last novel I wrote is about a terrific villain, a monk who made who came up with horrible allegations against the Jewish community in Norwich, in England. And he was a sort of medieval conspiracy theorist, and the work he did had horrible consequences. And trying to write up against that wasn't easy. And I had to translate a lot of his work, and it is seething with hatred. So I really had to find a way to do all kinds of things to just keep humanity in this book. So that was hard, but yeah.
Any final questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you so much, Harald, for being here.
Thank you.
Huge honor.
So nice to talk.